Staff Sergeant Brianna Walker wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the fighting. Her job was simple: coordinate supply convoys, track logistics, make sure ammunition, food, and equipment reached the forward operating bases on time. She was an administrator with a rifle qualification, not a trigger puller. She'd spent 3 years in supply operations and had never fired her weapon outside of annual qualification. The Rangers respected her work. She was efficient, organized, never let them run out of critical supplies, but she wasn't one of them. Wasn't a door kicker, wasn't someone you'd want beside you when bullets started flying. That's what everyone thought. Then came the day a routine supply convoy drove straight into a perfectly prepared ambush. 12 Rangers pinned down by 40 enemy fighters. The patrol leader was hit in the first 30 seconds. The medic was trying to stop bleeding while taking fire. The assistant patrol leader was coordinating what defense he could, but they were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. Brianna was in the last vehicle, the supply truck she insisted on riding to make sure critical equipment got delivered. When the ambush hit, she watched Rangers fall, watched the patrol's defensive formation collapse under overwhelming fire. She looked at the M4 carbine she carried, the weapon she'd qualified with but never really used. Looked at the Rangers fighting for their lives 40 meters ahead. Looked at the enemy fighters moving to flank and finish them. Then, Brianna did something that would change how everyone saw her forever. She grabbed her rifle, chambered a round, and stepped out into the kill zone. 11 enemy fighters were advancing on the Ranger position from the left flank, thinking they were unopposed. They were wrong. In the next 45 seconds, Brianna fired 11 controlled bursts from her M4 on full automatic. 11 enemy fighters fell, 11 threats eliminated with the kind of precision that professional infantry soldiers train years to achieve. When the shooting stopped and the Rangers secured the area, they found something impossible. A supply coordinator who'd never seen combat had just executed a perfect defensive engagement that saved 12 lives. Before I show you how someone who just handled logistics became the most dangerous person in that kill zone, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and hit subscribe, because this story proves that the most lethal warriors are often the ones nobody expects. Now let's get into it. 3 years of just logistics. Brianna Walker joined the Army at 22 with a college degree in supply chain management and a desire to serve. The recruiter had been honest. With your background, you'll go straight into logistics. It's not glamorous, but it's critical. Wars are won by bullets and beans, and someone has to make sure both get where they're needed. She'd accepted that. Not everyone could be infantry. Someone had to handle the unglamorous work that kept combat operations running. Her first deployment was to a relatively quiet sector, mostly convoy escort, warehouse management, inventory control. She was good at it. Really good. Within 6 months, she'd reorganized the entire supply chain for her battalion, reducing delivery times by 30% and eliminating critical shortages that had plagued previous rotations. The infantry loved her because ammunition and supplies arrived when promised. The medics loved her because medical supplies were never delayed. Command loved her because she made their logistics headaches disappear. But she wasn't a warrior. Everyone knew that. Her second deployment was more active, more combat operations, more danger, more stress. Brianna adapted, learning to coordinate supply drops under fire, managing logistics during sustained operations, keeping the supply chain functioning even when convoys took casualties. She qualified with her M4 carbine every year, as required. Her scores were adequate, not great, not terrible, just good enough to pass. She'd never considered herself a shooter. The weapon was just part of the uniform, something you carried but hoped you'd never need. On her third deployment, she was assigned to a Ranger battalion conducting operations in a high-threat area. The Rangers were professional, skilled, and had a reputation for aggressive direct action missions. They respected competence regardless of job specialty, and Brianna had proven herself competent. Walker, you're the best supply coordinator we've ever had," Captain Marcus Hendricks told her during an in-brief. "You keep us fed, armed, and equipped. That's not a small thing. Just keep doing what you do." "Yes, sir. That's the plan." She'd been in country for 2 months when the patrol requested her presence on a convoy. They needed sensitive communications equipment delivered to a forward patrol base, and they wanted someone who understood the equipment manifest to ensure nothing was damaged or lost during transport. "Walker, you up for a convoy run?" Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison asked. He was the patrol leader, a 10-year Ranger veteran with 3 deployments and a chest full of decorations. "Sure. Where are we going?" "Patrol Base Apache, 40 clicks north. Should be routine. We've run this route a dozen times. You'll be in the last vehicle with the sensitive equipment. Just make sure it gets there intact." "Can do, Staff Sergeant." The convoy consisted of 4 vehicles, 2 MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, carrying the Ranger Patrol, 1 gun truck with a .50 caliber machine gun, and 1 cargo truck carrying supplies with Brianna riding shotgun. They departed at 0600 hours, moving through terrain that varied from open desert to rocky hills to narrow valleys. The route had been cleared and was considered relatively secure. Enemy activity in this area had been minimal for weeks. Brianna rode with Specialist Tommy Chen, a driver with a relaxed attitude and a constant stream of bad jokes. She spent the trip reviewing manifest documents and ensuring the cargo was properly secured. At the 30-kilometer mark, they entered a narrow valley where the road was constrained by rocky outcrops on both sides. Good terrain for an ambush, but intelligence said the area was clear. Intelligence was wrong. The ambush. The first indication something was wrong came when the lead MRAP hit an IED, an improvised explosive device buried in the road. The explosion was massive, lifting the front of the 20-ton vehicle off the ground and shredding its front axle. Before the MRAP even settled back onto its damaged suspension, automatic weapons fire erupted from both sides of the valley. 40 enemy fighters had positioned themselves in the rocks, creating overlapping fields of fire on the kill zone. The ambush was textbook professional. Immobilize the lead vehicle to stop the convoy, then engage with overwhelming firepower from protected positions. The second MRAP's gunner returned fire immediately, his M240 machine gun hammering rounds into the rocks. The gun truck's .50 cal opened up with deeper, slower thuds that sent massive rounds into enemy positions, but the Rangers were trapped. The lead vehicle was disabled, blocking forward movement. Enemy fire was coming from elevated positions on both flanks. They had to dismount and fight from whatever cover they could find. Staff Sergeant Morrison was hit in the first minute. A round caught him in the shoulder as he exited his vehicle, spinning him around and dropping him behind inadequate cover. The patrol medic, Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, dragged him to better cover while simultaneously treating his wound and returning fire. The assistant patrol leader, Sergeant First Class Derek Hayes, took command. "All units, establish defensive perimeter. Suppress flanking positions. Get that .50 caliber on the right side ridge." The Rangers fought with professional discipline, but they were outnumbered and caught in a prepared kill zone. Enemy fire was accurate and sustained. The Americans had to stay behind cover, which limited their ability to maneuver or escape. Brianna was in the cargo truck, 50 meters behind the main engagement. Chen had stopped the vehicle immediately when the IED detonated, but they were exposed. The truck had no armor, and bullets were already starting to impact around them. "Get down!" Chen shouted, diving behind the engine block. Brianna dropped into the passenger side footwell, her heart hammering. This wasn't supposed to happen. Supply runs were supposed to be safe. She was logistics, not infantry. She wasn't trained for this. Through the truck's windshield, now spiderwebbed with bullet impacts, she could see the Rangers fighting, could see them taking casualties, could see enemy fighters maneuvering through the rocks to flank the defensive position. Hayes was on the radio calling for air support, his voice controlled but urgent. "All stations, this is Reaper 2. We are in contact, heavy enemy fire, multiple casualties, requesting immediate close air support and medevac." The response crackled back. "Reaper 2, fast movers are 20 minutes out, medevac is 30 minutes. Can you hold?" 20 minutes. The Rangers would be overrun in 5. Brianna watched as a squad of 11 enemy fighters began moving through the rocks on the left flank, the side away from the main Ranger defensive position. They were positioning to attack from behind, to roll up the American line and finish the job. The Rangers couldn't see them. Were too focused on the main threat to their front. In maybe 2 minutes, those 11 fighters would be in position to fire into the backs of American soldiers who'd never see it coming. Brianna looked at her M4 carbine sitting on the seat beside her. She'd qualified with it, knew how to operate it, but she'd never fired it in combat, never engaged a human target. She was supply coordination, not a trigger puller. But those 11 enemy fighters were going to kill American soldiers. Brianna grabbed her rifle, checked that a magazine was seated, charged the weapon to chamber a round, and made a decision that terrified and empowered her simultaneously. She was going to stop them. 11 targets, 45 seconds. Brianna exited the passenger side of the truck, using the vehicle for cover from the main enemy position. The 11 flanking fighters were 70 meters away, moving through rocks in a loose tactical formation, focused on reaching their assault position. They hadn't seen her, weren't expecting resistance from the rear of the convoy. Brianna's hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to stay in cover, to let the Rangers handle this, to not expose herself to enemy fire. But she'd watched enough training exercises to know what was about to happen. Those 11 fighters would reach their position, open fire on the Rangers from behind, and kill people she'd served with for 2 months. She raised her M4, flipped the selector switch to full automatic, something she'd only done on qualification ranges, and looked through her iron sights at the closest enemy fighter. The range was 70 meters. The target was moving. She'd never made a shot like this outside of training. Brianna controlled her breathing, in through nose, out through mouth, just like they'd taught her, found her natural respiratory pause, settled her sights on center mass of the lead fighter. Then she squeezed the trigger. The M4 roared, firing on full automatic, 3 rounds in a controlled burst. The recoil pushed against her shoulder, familiar from training but more intense than she remembered. The sound was deafening. The lead enemy fighter dropped, his weapon clattering against rocks. The other 10 fighters froze, trying to identify where the fire had come from. They'd been moving toward the Rangers, weren't expecting to be engaged from behind. Brianna didn't give them time to react. She transitioned to the second target, settled her sights, and fired another 3-round burst. The second fighter fell. Now the enemy squad was reacting, turning toward her, bringing their weapons to bear. Brianna was exposed, standing in the open with nothing but a thin-skinned truck between her and 11, now 9, enemy fighters. She kept shooting. Third target, 75 meters, slightly elevated on a boulder. 3-round burst, target down. Fourth target moving left to find cover. Brianna tracked him, led his movement, fired. 2 rounds hit, 1 missed, target down. The enemy fighters were returning fire now, bullets impacting around Brianna's position. She dropped to one knee behind the truck's engine block, staying low, using the vehicle's mass for protection. Fifth target, trying to flank her position. She caught him mid-movement, fired, watched him stumble and fall. 6 enemy fighters left, and they were spreading out, trying to surround her position. Professional tactics from professional soldiers who'd realized they were under effective fire. Brianna's magazine was getting low. She'd fired maybe 20 rounds. The M4 held 30. She'd need to reload soon. 6th target, firing from behind a rock at 40 meters. Brianna put her sights on the rock's edge where she could see his rifle barrel, waited for him to expose himself to fire, then engaged. 3-round burst, target down, 5 left, 7th target, moving fast between positions. Brianna fired a longer burst, 5 rounds, tracking his movement, at least 2 hits, target down, 4 left. Her rifle clicked empty. Magazine exhausted. Brianna dropped the empty mag, pulled a fresh one from her vest. The motion automatic from hundreds of training repetitions, slammed it home, and charged her weapon. The whole reload took maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity with enemy fighters shooting at her. 8th target, 50 meters, taking aim at her position. Brianna engaged first. 3-round burst center mass. Target dropped before he could fire. 3 left, and they were withdrawing, pulling back from an engagement that had gone catastrophically wrong for them. They'd expected to ambush the Rangers from behind. Instead, they'd been ambushed by someone they hadn't known existed. 9th target, moving through rocks at 80 meters. Difficult shot at that range with iron sights and a moving target. Brianna fired a 4-round burst, compensating for range and movement. 3 rounds missed, 1 connected. Target fell. 2 left, running now, abandoning the engagement. 10th target, 90 meters and climbing over rocks to escape. Brianna took a breath, settled her aim, and fired a 5-round burst. She saw impacts on the rocks near the target, saw him stumble, at least 1 hit, and fall out of sight. 1 enemy fighter left, almost out of range, disappearing into the rocks. Brianna fired her last burst, the remainder of her magazine, toward the fleeing fighter. She couldn't tell if she'd hit him or if he'd escaped, but he was out of the fight either way. Silence fell over her position. 11 enemy fighters had tried to flank the Ranger position. None of them had made it. Some were confirmed dead. The rest were wounded or had fled. Brianna looked at her rifle, the weapon she'd carried for 3 years but never thought she'd use, and realized her hands had stopped shaking. Her breathing was steady. Her mind was clear. She'd just engaged 11 enemy combatants and won. The aftermath. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Hayes was shouting over the radio. The main enemy force was withdrawing, pulling back from an engagement that had cost them heavy casualties. The Rangers began conducting battle damage assessment, checking casualties, securing the perimeter. It was only then that Hayes realized the flanking attack had never materialized. "Anyone see what happened to that squad moving on our left flank?" he called out. "They're down, Sergeant," Specialist Rodriguez reported from her position. "Someone engaged them from the rear, all down or withdrew." Who was behind us? That's when everyone realized. Just the supply truck, with Chen and Walker. Hayes moved quickly to their position, weapon ready, expecting to find enemy fighters who'd somehow gotten around their perimeter. Instead, he found Brianna Walker, standing beside the cargo truck, her M4 held at low ready, a spent magazine at her feet and a fresh one in her weapon. "Walker, was that you shooting?" Brianna nodded, still processing what had just happened. 11 enemy fighters were moving to flank your position. I engaged them before they could reach assault position. Hayes stared at her. "You engaged 11 enemy fighters by yourself?" "Yes, Sergeant." "How many did you get?" "All of them. Some are confirmed KIA, others broke contact and withdrew." Hayes looked at the rocks where the enemy squad had been moving, saw bodies, saw blood trails leading away. Then he looked back at Brianna Walker, the supply coordinator who'd never seen combat before today. "Walker, have you been hiding the fact that you're secretly an elite infantry soldier?" "No, Sergeant. I just qualified with my rifle and didn't want Rangers to die because I was too scared to use it." Morrison, who'd been patched up by Rodriguez and had his arm in a sling, approached. "Walker just saved our entire patrol. That flanking squad would have rolled us up. We'd all be dead or captured." Word spread quickly through the Rangers. The supply coordinator, the person they'd respected for keeping them equipped but never thought of as a fighter, had just conducted a perfect defensive engagement against 11 enemy combatants. When the area was secured and medevac arrived for the wounded, Hayes pulled Brianna aside. "Walker, I need to understand something. You've been with us for 2 months. You've never been on patrol, never been in combat, never done anything except logistics. How the hell did you just execute a textbook defensive engagement that most infantry soldiers couldn't pull off?" Brianna thought about how to explain it. "Sergeant, I've spent 3 years coordinating supplies for combat units. I've sat in on hundreds of briefings, listened to thousands of after-action reports, watched infantry tactics being discussed and analyzed. I might not have done it myself, but I've absorbed a lot of information about how combat works." "That's not the same as actually doing it." "No, sir, it's not. But when those 11 fighters were moving to kill you, I didn't think about what I hadn't done. I just remembered everything I'd heard in briefings about target acquisition, fire discipline, ammunition management, and I applied it." Hayes studied her with new respect. "Walker, you just proved something important. Combat effectiveness isn't just about who trains to fight. It's about who has the courage to step up when the moment demands it. You had that courage." The patrol limped back to base with their damaged vehicles. Morrison and 2 other Rangers were medevaced for serious wounds. The rest had minor injuries. Everyone was alive, largely because Brianna had stopped the flanking attack that would have destroyed their defensive position. The investigation and recognition. When the patrol returned to the forward operating base, Command immediately launched an investigation, not into Brianna's actions, but to understand how a non-combat specialist had successfully engaged 11 enemy combatants. They reviewed her qualification scores, average. They checked her training records, standard for support personnel, nothing exceptional. They interviewed everyone present at the engagement. The conclusion was inescapable. Brianna Walker had no special training, no exceptional qualifications, no combat background. She was exactly what her file said, a supply coordinator who happened to be in the right place at the right time with the courage to act. But the physical evidence told a different story. When a patrol went back to recover enemy remains and collect intelligence, they documented Brianna's engagement with forensic precision. 11 enemy fighters engaged at ranges between 40 and 90 meters. 8 confirmed kills with M4 carbine on full automatic. 3 additional casualties that withdrew from the engagement. Approximately 65 rounds expended, average of 6 to 7 rounds per target. All shots fired from standing or kneeling positions under enemy fire. 0 friendly casualties from her engagement. This is professional-level marksmanship, the intelligence officer noted during the debrief. 8 confirmed kills with 65 rounds is better than most of our infantry achieve in similar engagements. And she did it while under fire as a non-combat specialist using full automatic fire, which is notoriously difficult to control accurately. Captain Hendricks, who'd always respected Brianna's logistics work, was present for the investigation. Staff Sergeant Walker, I need to ask you directly, how did you achieve this level of performance? Brianna had been thinking about that question since the engagement. Sir, I think it's because I wasn't thinking about it as combat. I was thinking about it as a problem that needed a solution. 11 threats needed to be eliminated before they could harm Rangers. I had the tool to eliminate those threats, so I did. But the accuracy, the fire discipline, the tactical decision-making, sir, I've been managing supply chains for 3 years. Every day I solve logistical problems that have multiple variables and time constraints. This was just another problem. 11 threats, limited ammunition, time constraint before they reached assault position. I broke it down into components and addressed each component systematically. The room was silent as everyone processed this explanation. She'd treated combat like a logistics problem. Identify resources, assess requirements, execute solution. That's the most unorthodox explanation for combat effectiveness I've ever heard, Hendricks said slowly. And it's also probably the most honest. You didn't overthink it. You just solved the problem in front of you. The Rangers who'd been on the patrol had a simpler take. Walker's a killer. Doesn't matter that she coordinates supplies. When shit hit the fan, she stepped up and did work. 2 weeks later, Brianna was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device for her actions during the engagement. The citation read, "For exceptionally valorous conduct in the face of armed enemy forces." Staff Sergeant Walker, while serving as a supply coordinator, engaged 11 enemy combatants who were maneuvering to attack American forces from an undefended flank. Through decisive action and exceptional marksmanship, Staff Sergeant Walker eliminated 8 enemy fighters and forced 3 others to withdraw, directly saving the lives of 12 American soldiers. Her actions exemplify the highest standards of military service. At the award ceremony, Morrison, his arm still in a sling from the wound he'd taken, stood with the other Rangers who'd been on the patrol. When Hendricks pinned the medal on Brianna's uniform, Morrison started a slow clap that spread through the entire formation. "That's for saving our asses," Morrison said afterward, shaking her hand with his good arm. "Supply coordinator or not, you're a Ranger in my book." The shift. After the engagement, something changed in how people viewed Brianna. She was still the supply coordinator, still handled logistics, still managed the warehouse, still ensured supplies reached where they were needed. But she was also the supply coordinator who'd dropped 11 enemy fighters in 45 seconds. Rangers who'd previously seen her as support staff now asked her opinion on tactical matters. Junior soldiers asked for shooting tips. Command started including her in mission planning briefings, not because her job required it, but because her perspective had proven valuable. "Walker, you've got a unique viewpoint," Hayes told her during a planning session. "You think about problems differently than we do. Sometimes that difference is what we need." Brianna adapted to her new role, still primarily focused on logistics, but now also contributing to tactical discussions when her input was relevant. She also changed how she approached her own training. She'd always done the minimum required: qualify with her weapon, pass physical fitness tests, complete mandatory training. Now she trained like she expected to use these skills. She spent hours on the range, improving her marksmanship, learning to control full automatic fire more effectively, practicing rapid target transitions. She worked with the Rangers during their training exercises, learning infantry tactics not from briefings but from actually doing them. "Why the sudden interest in combat training?" Rodriguez asked her during a joint exercise. "You've already proven you can perform under pressure." "Because next time, and there probably will be a next time, I want to be even better. I got lucky in that engagement. The enemy didn't expect resistance from the rear, which gave me time to engage before they could effectively return fire. Next time, I might not have that advantage." 3 months after the ambush, Brianna was on another convoy, this time with explicit instructions from command that she should be treated as a combat asset, not just logistics support. The convoy took contact from an enemy patrol trying to ambush a supply route. This time, Brianna wasn't surprised or hesitant. She returned fire immediately, her weapon handling and target acquisition noticeably improved from 3 months of intensive training. The engagement lasted 90 seconds. 3 enemy fighters killed, 2 wounded, the rest withdrew. 0 American casualties. When they returned to base, Morrison, who'd been leading the convoy, filed an after-action report that included, "Staff Sergeant Walker continues to demonstrate exceptional combat effectiveness while maintaining her primary duties as supply coordinator. Her presence on convoys significantly enhances our defensive capabilities." 6 months later, the deployment was winding down. Brianna had been in country for 8 months, with 4 months remaining. She'd been on 12 convoys, participated in 2 defensive engagements, and never fired her weapon unless absolutely necessary. But when she did fire, her effectiveness was remarkable. Her cumulative combat statistics read like something from an elite infantry soldier's record: 14 confirmed enemy KIA, 6 enemy wounded, 0 friendly casualties from engagements she participated in. "You know," Hendricks said during her mid-deployment counseling, "you could request a transfer to infantry. With your combat record, you'd be accepted immediately, probably fast-tracked for advanced training." Brianna considered it. The idea was tempting, to officially become what people now saw her as, a combat soldier rather than a support specialist who happened to be good in a fight. But she looked at the supply warehouse, at the organized shelves and efficient systems she'd built, at the Rangers who never ran out of critical equipment because she made sure supplies arrived on time. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm good at logistics, really good, and combat effectiveness isn't just about who pulls the trigger. It's about making sure those triggers have bullets, those soldiers have food, those medevacs have medical supplies. Someone has to handle the unglamorous work that keeps operations running." "But you're also clearly good at combat." "Yes, sir, and I'll continue to train and be ready to fight when necessary. But my primary value to this unit is making sure everyone else can fight at maximum effectiveness. That's where I make the biggest impact." Hendricks smiled. "You know what, Walker? That's exactly the right answer. We've got plenty of people who want to be infantry. We've got very few people who are exceptional at logistics and can fight when needed. You're more valuable in your current role." When the deployment ended and Brianna rotated back to the United States, she carried with her a Bronze Star, a combat action badge, and a reputation that had spread beyond her unit. She was the supply coordinator who'd saved a Ranger patrol, the logistics specialist who dropped 11 enemy fighters in 45 seconds, the support soldier who proved that combat effectiveness isn't determined by your job title. It's determined by your ability to perform when the moment demands it. 2 years later, training. The next generation. Brianna was promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned as the logistics training chief for a new unit preparing for deployment. Her job was to train the next generation of supply specialists on everything from inventory management to convoy operations. But she also ran something unusual, a combat effectiveness course for non-combat specialists. Listen up, she told a classroom full of supply specialists, mechanics, and administrative personnel who'd never expected to receive combat training. Your job isn't to seek out combat. Your job is to make sure combat soldiers have what they need. But if you're deployed to a combat zone, there's a chance, maybe a small chance, but a real chance, that you'll find yourself in a situation where you need to fight. She pulled up images from her engagement, the valley, the ambush site, the aftermath. 2 years ago, I was exactly where you are. I was a supply coordinator. I'd qualified with my weapon, but never expected to use it. Then, I was on a convoy that got ambushed, and I watched Rangers fighting for their lives against an enemy force that was about to flank and destroy them. She showed them tactical maps of the engagement, breaking down her decision-making process, explaining how she'd prioritized targets, managed her ammunition, maintained fire discipline under pressure. I'm not telling you this to glorify combat. I'm telling you this because when that moment comes, if that moment comes, you need to be mentally prepared to act. You need to have trained enough that your weapons handling is automatic. You need to have thought through what you'll do if combat finds you. One student raised her hand. Sergeant, how did you stay calm during the engagement? I feel like I'd panic. I was terrified, Brianna admitted. My hands were shaking when I first grabbed my rifle, but I'd absorbed enough training and briefings to know what needed to happen. I broke the problem down into components. 11 threats, need to eliminate them before they reach assault position, have limited ammunition, so make every shot count. Then, I just executed the solution, one target at a time. But weren't you worried about getting shot? Of course, but I was more worried about what would happen if I didn't act. 12 Rangers would have died. That fear, the fear of inaction, was stronger than the fear of getting shot. So I acted. The training course became popular not just with support soldiers, but with combat soldiers who wanted to understand Brianna's unique approach to tactical problems. She taught that combat effectiveness comes in many forms. Sometimes it's years of infantry training. Sometimes it's the ability to make a split-second decision that thousands of hours of logistics problem-solving has prepared you for. 5 years after the engagement, Master Sergeant Brianna Walker stood in front of a new group of Rangers during their pre-deployment training. She'd been invited to speak about combat logistics and operational effectiveness. Most of you know me from the story, she began. The supply coordinator who dropped 11 enemy fighters and saved a patrol. That story's been told so many times it's practically a legend. But I want to tell you the real story, not about the 45 seconds of shooting, but about the 3 years of preparation that made those 45 seconds possible. She walked them through her career. 3 years of logistics work, thousands of hours listening to tactical briefings, countless conversations with infantry soldiers about their operations, all the knowledge she'd absorbed without even realizing she was learning. When that moment came and I had to fight, I wasn't relying on infantry training I'd never received. I was relying on 3 years of being around professional soldiers and paying attention. I was relying on qualification training I'd taken seriously, even though I never expected to use it in combat. I was relying on a mindset that treats every problem as solvable if you break it down into components. She looked at the Rangers, young, motivated professional soldiers who'd trained for years to do exactly what she'd stumbled into. You're the tip of the spear. You're the ones who'll kick doors and take the fight to the enemy. But remember that everyone behind you, the supply specialists, the mechanics, the medics, the administrative personnel, they're not just support, they're soldiers. And if they're given the right training, the right mindset, and the right opportunity, they can fight just as effectively as you can. The lesson isn't that everyone should train to be infantry. The lesson is that combat effectiveness comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a ranger clearing a building. Sometimes it's a supply coordinator who refuses to let Rangers die because she's too afraid to use her weapon. After a talk, one of the Ranger instructors approached her. Ma'am, that was one of the best presentations on combat mindset I've heard. You should consider writing doctrine on this. Brianna smiled. I'll leave the doctrine writing to the professionals. I've got supplies to coordinate and soldiers to train. But if my story helps one support soldier realize they're capable of more than they think, then it was worth telling. 10 years later, Reflection Command. Sergeant Major Brianna Walker stood in the same valley where, 10 years ago, she'd made 11 perfect shots that saved 12 lives. She was back in country as the senior enlisted logistics advisor for an entire division, overseeing supply operations across multiple bases. The valley looked different now, peaceful, with local civilians using the road for commerce rather than conflict. The war had moved elsewhere, then largely ended. But this spot would always hold significance for her. She walked to where her truck had been that day, the rocks where 11 enemy fighters had advanced, the positions where Rangers had fought for their lives. It felt like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to a different person. But the lessons from that day had shaped everything that came after. Not just for her, but for how the military thought about combat effectiveness and the roles non-combat specialists could play in operations. Her story had been told in training courses, written about in military journals, discussed in doctrine development. Not because what she'd done was exceptional, plenty of soldiers had performed similar feats, but because of who she was when she did it. She wasn't infantry, wasn't supposed to be there, wasn't trained for what happened, but when the moment demanded it, she'd performed. That's what people remembered. That's what inspired the next generation. Brianna's radio crackled. Thunder 6, this is your driver. Ready to move when you are, Sergeant Major. She looked one more time at the valley, at the place where she'd learned that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about acting, despite the fear. Roger, I'm ready. Let's go. As the vehicle drove away, Brianna thought about the young supply specialists she was training now, the ones who looked at her and saw someone who proved that job titles don't define capability. She hoped they'd never need to use what she taught them, hoped they'd spend entire careers coordinating supplies without ever having to fight. But if that moment came, if they found themselves in a situation where action was required, she hoped they'd remember that courage lives in everyone, waiting for the moment when it's needed most. And when that moment comes, the only thing that matters is whether you have the will to act. Brianna Walker had proven she did, and in doing so, she'd helped others discover they had it too. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.